Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, this is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, Thursday, August the 5th, and I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and the chat room is open if anybody's awake and wants to sit in there. We're going to continue talking about codependency today, and from that article that I found from SAA Help, and it's a good article. It just there's some more pretty good information on there. I'm really learning a lot myself from it, and I hope that other people will get something out of it as well. I didn't know a whole lot about codependency and what it was all about. I always thought that I did, and I thought that, over the years that I had a good understanding of what codependency was, but I really didn't and had never done the research on it, and that's why I wanted to take a look at it, because I believe that a lot of people, suffer sort of with the codependent behaviors in their lives, and I think in their lives, they might not even realize that they're doing it. I had people tell me that people in my own family were codependent, and also tell me that they were hoping that I wouldn't be codependent, and so to take a look at it for me is very helpful. So I'm hoping that the information is helpful for everybody else too. And I say this on every show. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I don't hold any certificates in those areas. I'm just a private citizen who pays to do my own blog talk shows, really because I believe, I'm a survivor of child abuse, first of all, and I really feel that, we can't talk about child abuse enough. It needs to be mainstream. It needs to be front page, newspapers, television. We have to find the answer to this. We have to stop child abuse, right? It's so important. It's such an epidemic, and people just want to pretend it's no big deal and hide their heads in the sand. And people who have not been abused just don't feel like it's their problem. They shouldn't have to deal with it. And if those other people, who are abusing their children, don't want to get help, well, too bad. But they're not putting themselves in those children's shoes who are being abused, right? And thinking about the horrific lives that they're living right now as we speak, and also the fact that their lives could be taken from them, their innocence lost and stolen, and really, we owe it to those children to protect them. And as a society, as a whole, right, we have to find ways that are going to work, to help parents who are having a hard time coping, and to help protect children, even when they're at school and in the daycare. We really have to work to protect children, right? So that's why I'm doing these shows, and also just to be, one more voice out there for other survivors, just to say, we can do it. I truly believe that. I hope everyone will just reach out and get some help, right? And that's what happened to me about 3 years ago, and especially this last year, I've really started reaching out to people back in last fall, and it's made a huge difference in my life. It's made all the difference. I'd never reached out before, had never tried to get help, and so I would say, whether reach out and get some help, whether it's a therapist, a counselor, professional help is really a good idea. If I had the money, I would go myself. Even group support. If you don't really like the whole counselor therapist type thing, there's group support where you can get online. You can join child abuse survivor groups online anonymously quite often. You just have to, when you sign in and sign up, you have to sign up with your email address and your name. But when you're in the chat rooms and whatnot, and actually as your profile page, you can be anonymous. You can have a different name. You don't have to tell people who you are if you don't want to disclose that. And then you can get some help, right? So just, reach out, talk to someone. Don't suffer in silence. That's what I did for a long, long time, 40 years. And, it's sad. It's a sad place to be, right? Suffering on your own and just living with this pain on your own and not able to talk about it, not able to validate it, to talk with people, excuse me, who have been there and understand, right? And quite often survivors don't get that validation because their own families will not acknowledge the abuse, right? Or they just don't want to handle it. They don't want to deal with it. And so we need, to reach out to people and just, not suffer on our own and not live in this world of silence and pain and misery on our own. And, it's a sad place to be, I know, because I was there. So, yeah, that's why I'm doing these shows. And also because, I fight to stop child abuse. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and working all the time to study and get the information, get the education out to people that we need to stop and prevent child abuse from ever happening again. And we have programs that we'll be rolling out, in the future when we get funding, that will be helping families, will be helping children who have been abused, will be hopefully going nationwide, and that's the main goal, and Canada-wide, right? So hopefully in the future, people will be able to access more of our services. Right now, if you need resources or if we can help you with anything, we cannot offer legal assistance, that's for sure, or legal advice as a not-for-profit organization, but we can try to help you to steer you in the right direction as far as resources and information goes, and other people who can possibly help, right? So make sure you get a hold of us if you need something. www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com, and excuse me. And I always say this on every show: if you're under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, and that's just because I care about children, and that's why I'm doing this, right? I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Fighting to save children's lives, right? Every day, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I ask people who are under the age of 18, really for my own, for my own legalities, and also for you, because children under the age of 18, you should have an adult know what you're doing online, especially for this kind of stuff, for listening to things that are very adult-oriented, young people especially. I know when I was 18, I did not feel like a child. When I was 17 and a half, I sure didn't feel like a child, but, with all regards and respect to the law, which I do support, I would hope that you'd have someone listen to the show with you, just to make sure it's something that you should be listening to, and then they can help you if you have questions, especially real young children, right? Because abuse is not talked about a whole lot in mainstream society or in schools. They might mention it once in a while, they might mention something, but, it's not talked about, the issues surrounding adult survivor issues and whatnot, and different things, and it's a little bit scary, and if people haven't experienced it, which I hope they haven't, they might not know exactly what the information is all about. So if you have someone listen to the show with you, they can help you find those answers to those questions that you might have, and also just to see if it's something that is age appropriate for you to be listening to, because I don't know where the players are, the Blog Talk players. They might be placed around on different websites, and there's no way for me to tell that. So that's why I always ask people to have permission to listen to my show under the age of 18. And so we'll get started. I wanted to continue on with codependency. And this is from www.saa-help.com/partners_of_sa/codependency.htm. And we left off on Tuesday morning with about codependency and recovery from addictions. That's the next section. And it says, ironically, codependency isn't about other people. And I'm just reading from the page there. You can bring that up for yourself. It says, it's about the relationship with the self. And codependents often believe that if the addict in their life sobered up, their problems would go away. And countless addicts find their relationships end or change radically when they get clean and sober. The family and relationship dynamic was predicted on the addict being the sick one. As the addict gets well, they may find their patterns, and family members have no idea how to adjust to the changes. And enabling codependence may subvert the addict's recovery, so the unhealthy relationship dynamics can be preserved. Enabling codependence may subvert the addict's recovery, so the unhealthy relationship dynamics can be preserved. So that's like people that enable someone who is a drug user in the home or in the relationship, whether it's a partner or a sibling or a child. People will enable them just to keep the relationship going the way that it is. They don't want they don't want change, and they just enable. And that's what my parents were, enablers. They didn't get my brothers any help. My brothers were using drugs at a very young age, and my mom would find my brother's pills and phone the hotlines to see the pill hotlines to see what they were, and then she would destroy them. But she would never get help from my brother. She didn't say, son, I love you, but you really have to go get help. We're going to support you as a family, because our family was so dysfunctional that, my mom did not know how to do anything but enable that kind of behavior. It was absolutely horrible to see that. And, both of my brothers that were doing drugs at a young age are both dead now. And, I think that they could have, had my parents obviously been coping better and had more care and concern for their children instead of their own, marital problems and marital abuse and whatnot, then I believe my brothers would still be here. I really do. It's just there was no help for them, and it was all enabled, and it was all, you know, uh, it was just allowed, right? They were allowed to destroy their lives, right? And I blame my parents for that. Absolutely, I do. Addicted codependents who hid behind another's more dramatic problem may leave the relationship rather than give up their own using. Addicted codependents often progress in their own addictions more rapidly when their partner enters recovery, since the change in the relationship is stressful. So I guess that can be bad. Like if you have two people who are addicted and they're both codependent, you know, one might actually um, give up on the relationship and leave rather than quit doing what they're doing, whether it's alcohol or substance abuse. And as addicted codependents often progress in their own addictions more rapidly when their partner enters recovery. So if one enters recovery, the other one, because of the stress, might actually use more or drink more or whatever the problem is. That's absolutely horrible. You know, it's so sad to see people going through this stuff. I know firsthand what that's like. Not alcohol, but drugs, right? Codependents in denial cannot adjust to the relationship changes that occur when their partner begins recovery, and they may move on to other addictive relationships so they can cling to their own dysfunctional patterns. The controlling codependent is often lost without someone to blame, fix, and control. And how many times have you heard of people who leave one alcoholic only to enter a relationship with another one? And we see that happening with people. You know, I've heard of that from people in my lifetime. You know, leave one bad relationship for another, and they turn out to be, you know, drug users or alcoholics or, you know, whatever. Absolutely horrible. All people involved in the addictive cycle need a solid recovery program. If relationships are to be preserved and they are to lead happy, fulfilling lives, right? And I think that's just it. We need help, right? I mean, every now and then, we all need some help. I don't care who a person is, you know. And it's important to get that help, right? Wherever you can. And if you try at some point and then it just doesn't, you know, it just doesn't seem to be working, then just try something else. You know, as long as we keep trying and keep reaching out, that's where I really believe that eventually we'll find the right help that works for us. That's what I like to believe anyway. I like to remain positive about this whole reaching out and getting help thing, because too many people have done it. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, they must have run into roadblocks. They must have run into red tape and run into things that didn't work for them, you know. And here they are, you know, so many years later, saying you can do it. You know, I'm sure it wasn't a very easy and smooth road for them either. And that's the whole issue. You know, you listen to some of these people talk out here, you know, like especially you know, motivational speakers and whatnot, which I really enjoy listening to, because they've been there, they've done it, and quite often, you know, they didn't have an easy road either. And you can imagine, you know, some of these people's lives who were recovered alcoholics and recovered drug users and recovered people who have survived abuse and moved on, and you know, they didn't have an easy time of it. It's not like they just snapped their fingers one day and said, "Oh, I'm healed. Oh, I'm recovered. Oh, I'm free of that abuse." You know, I mean, they all must have had trouble too. I look at them and I try to picture their lives and I say, "Wow, you know, they probably had a lot of problems trying to get that help and get to where they are today. And it wasn't probably an easy road. And here they are saying it's not an easy road, but we can do it." And so, see, I believe that. I really do, because there's too many people who are good examples out there. If you start looking around at all the people who have survived such horrific stuff, you know, and even their own, you know, self-sabotaging and drug use and suicide attempts and whatnot, and then you see them today and you think, wow, you know, look what they came through, look what they've done. And so that's always very hopeful for me. It's very helpful for me to see this, because it just reinforces the fact that if we hang in there long enough, we can do this, you know. But we do have to try. We do have to make an attempt. It's not going to happen if we don't try. So that's the thing. Codependency recovery, they go on to talk about that. They say, recovery from codependency is deep work based on shifting our relationship with ourselves. They said here, we may have to let go if the people in our lives are unwilling to work through their issues. Firing, quote unquote, firing the people we were codependent with may be a part of that, but remember, codependency is about us, not them. And recovery from codependency involves learning to take responsible for our own actions, feelings, behavior, issues, and lives. So that's what they're saying. Recovery from codependency involves learning to take responsibility for our own actions, feelings, behaviors, issues, and lives. So it's up to us, right? Codependents have as much difficulty accepting their powerlessness over people and events as addicts have regarding their powerlessness over the drug choice. Ongoing therapy and a 12-step program, CODA, CODA, meetings are highly advised. And they said letting go of the need to control people, places, and events is difficult, but will ultimately set us free of our self-defeating patterns, shame, and fear. The investment in caretaking control take a lot of our energy. Letting that go frees our energy for more productive uses. So that's awesome. I mean, it's just like, yeah, I mean, we can learn how to cope with these things, you know. We can learn how to handle these things and how to deal with them, but not if we don't get some sort of help or even self-help, right? Just looking at our own actions, our own feelings, our own behaviors, and working to try to change some of these sort of, you know, dysfunctional behaviors that we have, you know, that were quite often brought on by abuse or, you know, child abuse or domestic violence and abuse, any kind of thing like that, you know, can bring on a lot of problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, and these other behavioral issues, you know, like DID and codependency and what else. There's so many. It's absolutely crazy what we have to deal with and go through having survived trauma and the trauma of abuse, right? And even people that are not abused suffer trauma. You know, you don't have to be a victim or a survivor of child abuse to have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Anyone can who's been in a traumatic experience, you know, like a car wreck or a health issue, something has gone wrong, and someone's been, you know, get sick in the family, or even ourselves, you know. Physical illness and stuff can cause post-traumatic stress disorder. Just anything that's very traumatic in our lives and just causes us the trauma actually causes us it works in the body as well, physically and in the mind. This whole fear and you know, what happens then is a person lives with all these fears and anxiety problems and all these issues. You know, people who have been in overseas in the military quite often suffer from PTSD. People who've been in like storms and whatnot, like hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that, they can suffer from things like that, from post-traumatic stress disorder. So you don't have, you know, there's a lot of people suffering from this stuff who were not abused as children. So that's true, and there's some people who have been abused as children who don't suffer from this stuff. So see, that's the thing. It's not all black and white, you know, one way or another. This just depends on the situation, depends on what's happened, depends on the person's coping abilities, coping mechanisms, depends a lot on how you were raised and how, you know, how much self-empowerment you have. You know, if you were brought up very confident and you know, very strong person, knowing that you can survive anything that you put your mind to, then quite often people will do that. They know that they have these skills built in, these things that they can use to help them when things go wrong, you know, car accidents and whatnot, terrible things, you know, death in the family or whatnot. So not everybody suffers from this stuff, but you know, when you're abused as a child, it's very, very easy to take on some of this stuff because child abuse is horrific, right? Any kind of child abuse is extremely wrong and it's extremely damaging, you know, whether it's physical, psychological, sexual, verbal, emotional, spiritual, you name it. It's all extremely damaging and horrific, you know, for children to have to survive this stuff and then go on to these adult behavioral issues that they have to try to work through, or the whole issue of trust, the whole issue of self-esteem and feeling like you're worth it and you're worth something. You're not just what your abuser might have told you, right? That's the thing. We have to kind of come up from behind the eight ball. That's what I look at it like. We're coming up from behind, you know, where we should be had we not been abused, right? So that's the thing. We have a little bit farther to go than a lot of people, I think, trying to get over some of this stuff, right? So they go on to say here, patterns and characteristics of codependence. These patterns and characteristics are offered as a tool to aid in self-evaluation. They may be particularly helpful to newcomers, but like they always say in all these websites, you know, we're not supposed to be self-diagnosing. So even if we do acknowledge that, so we do we do relate to some of this stuff, and this is what, sometimes I relate to a lot of this stuff, and then other times I don't. But even when I do relate to it, I generally don't go around saying, oh, I'm codependent, or, oh, I've got PTSD. People have asked me if I have PTSD, and, I always say, well, no, I've never been diagnosed with PTSD. I say, I relate to some of the symptoms of it, and I can relate to a lot of the anxiety especially. But I don't know if I have PTSD. I don't know if I ever did. I've never been diagnosed. So I don't take on these behaviors just because I read about them and that I relate to them in any way. What I do is I just look at it as the fact that if I was diagnosed, it'd be interesting to see if I really am codependent, or if I really was, if I did suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or these type of things, right? So I don't self-diagnose myself, and I think I find it interesting to look at this stuff because it does allow myself to see that some of my behaviors, are quite similar to a lot of this stuff, and some of them aren't, So it sort of it helps me to see what areas I can work on, you know what I mean, as far as learning to trust and learning to self-nurture, learning to take care of myself. See, because I was not shown how to take care of myself. People who are abused quite often are not shown how to take care of themselves. Obviously, children who have been abused, whether any type of abuse, physical, verbal, psychological, sexual, they're not being looked after properly, right? Obviously, the abusers are abusing them. So, especially if the parents are not looking after themselves and no one in the family is looking after themselves, then, very dysfunctional family, well, that's what I grew up in. And no one was looking after themselves, and they weren't looking after each other. They were tearing each other apart and ripping each other apart and destroying each other, right? So I had to start looking at all this stuff, and doing a lot of self-help, really, and looking to see how I could learn how to take care of myself and how I could learn how to cope, how I could learn how to treat myself right and to do the right things and to not self-sabotage. And, by looking at this stuff, it does help me to see what I need to work on, because I notice the points that I might still be behaving in a certain way so many years after the abuse, right? And so that's why it's so important for us to get help. And if you are struggling with a lot of this stuff, you want to get help, and you want to have a professional, licensed person make the diagnosis, right? And then they can move on and get some help for people. I've talked to people who like going to counselors and therapists, and they just say that their lives were saved because they did go to a counselor and a therapist, and that had they not gone, they might not be here today. And then I've had other people say they didn't like it, they didn't like the counseling and therapy, but they really like group support. Everybody's different, right? Everybody's different, and you have to find what works for you. If you're more of a private person and you're just having so much problem struggling, you might want to talk to a counselor, crisis line, somebody who you can talk to just one-on-one, a private conversation. And, you don't have to be public, going public. I'm going public. Reason I'm doing this, really, is because I want to do public speaking. I plan on doing nationwide tours. I plan on speaking in assemblies. Eventually, I plan on speaking in the government. I plan on going public, all the way with this. So, in the next 5 to 10 years. So, I'm just doing public speaking because I wanted to just start right away, just talking publicly about child abuse, right? And so, I had to come forward with my story, and I'm so glad that I did, because otherwise no one would have really cared and known about the abuse that we suffered as children and my family. And I wanted to be a voice for my brothers, who went to their graves in silence, and, so many people just thought they were just losers, and they didn't know what they had gone through as children, right, in the home. And I thought, no, I can't allow that to happen. I'm the only one speaking out in my family. I'm the only one willing to take an honest, hard, truthful look at the whole thing, and not bury my head in the sand, right? So this is the thing. It has a lot to do with public advocacy and the work that I'm going to be doing. And also, I just didn't want my brothers to go to their graves in shame and silence with no one knowing what happened to them. And even myself, when I leave this planet, I didn't want people to know, to not know what happened to me, because what happened to me was incredibly wrong. And my family will not admit it. They don't care. They don't care that my mom almost killed me. She could have bashed my head in many times and broke my neck. The verbal and emotional abuse that she put on me was absolutely horrible, and the stuff that my dad did was absolutely crazy. You know, that's why I wrote my book, and I went public with my story, because nobody else was going to speak out against it, and no one would have known what my parents did to us, right? And so I thought, no, I have to speak out. I have to. Truth is truth, and I believe in the truth. Truth is everything. If we don't have truth, what do we have, right? So we'll get on with the rest of this article here. Patterns and characteristics of codependence. Denial patterns, as they say here, these are stuff that we might relate to and then we might not, right? I have difficulty identifying what I'm feeling, right? It says, I minimize, alter, or deny how I truly feel. And I perceive myself as completely unselfish and dedicated to the well-being of others. These are denial patterns, right? If we can't be honest with ourselves, man, who are we going to be honest with? You know what I mean? And if we can't be honest with other people, who are we going to be? Honesty is everything as far as I'm concerned. And, I've hurt people in the past, and I've had to own up to it and not live in denial about it. And in order to move on with it, to be able to forgive myself first of all, and hopefully they would forgive me. I've done things in the past that I'm not proud of, and I think everybody has. There's no perfect person on this planet. There's a lot of people running around thinking that they're perfect, that don't want to take responsibility for their own actions, and that don't even want to identify with their own feelings. And a lot of times people who have been abused will quite often live in denial, and that's a real problem. A lot of times people who were the abusers live in denial because they don't want to face the fact that what they did to their family was wrong, what they did to their children or their child was wrong. It's very hurtful and hard. It's hard. I'm sure it's hurtful to the parent to have that thrown in their face. I've done it. I did that to both my parents. I threw it in their face when I was about 18 years old because I thought, what are they going to do? Kill me now? I don't think so. You know what I mean? I'm too old, and they're too old. So around the age of 18, I started throwing it in their face. Telling them off and telling them, look what you've done to me, look what you've done to your family, and really giving them a hard time. Because I wanted them to suffer. I really did. I wanted them to see what they had done to us, and to be able to. It's not that I wanted them to suffer. I kind of did. Part of me did, but the other part of me wanted them to see what they had done was so wrong. And that all their children wanted was love. All their children wanted was care and love, not hatred and abuse, right? And so, I was not living in denial ever, you know what I mean? I've never been living in denial about the abuse. Whereas my parents, they were always in denial. It's like, well, it's not our fault. Or my mom would be like, it's your dad's fault. It's your father's fault. It's all his fault. He's the abuser. When she was the one that was my abuser, right? My dad was often saying, oh, it's just your mother's fault. Your mother's crazy. And your mother, when he was very, very abusive himself. They always blamed everybody else, would never take responsibility. My mom never did, even in the last day that she was alive on the planet, didn't take full responsibility for what she did. She said she was a terrible mother on her deathbed, but that was it. She didn't apologize. She just couldn't do it. And my dad, same thing. He's not able to come to terms and come to the realistic reality of what he did to his children. And just recently wrote me a letter to explain the fact that he didn't know how to treat his children right, didn't know how to be a father, but it was the 1960s and it was the devil that made him do what he did. I have this letter for proof, right? He says, oh no, it was the 1960s and it was just the times. And so, that's why he did what he did to his children. So he lives in denial. My siblings live in denial because they do not want to come forward and acknowledge the abuse and learn to heal as I'm doing. But maybe they're just doing their own healing on their own thing. That's fine. Whatever. They don't. I don't know. I don't personally care. That's up to them. But it's so important that we get some help, right? They go on to talk about low self-esteem patterns, compliance patterns. So you can check this out: www.saahelp.com. /partners_SA/codependency.htm. They go on to talk about control patterns. There's books, information on books that are available, and all kinds of good stuff there. So it's a great website. It's a great little page, right? I hope everybody will check it out. And we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Tonight, Elizabeth Brawley will be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I hope you will join her show. She'll be on there hosting her show, www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And I'll be on again tomorrow morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, 6 o'clock a.m. If you need something, you just want to get a hold of me, or you just want to be a friend, or you need a friend, you want resources, you need some help, get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook. I'll be around, and especially tonight. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you so much for tuning in to all my shows. I really appreciate it, and most of you are my friends, and I just love you so much. Thanks for your support, and have a great day, everybody. I'll be keeping you in my heart. Bye-bye.